Did you know that of the 2,224 people aboard the Titanic in 1912, there was only one black passenger on record, and his body was never recovered after the sinking? The Royal Mail ship RMS Titanic, a British luxury ocean liner, sank on April 14th and 15th, 1912 during its maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City, killing approximately 1,500 passengers and ship crew on board. It was a tragic moment in the history of mankind. Families were separated, dreams were shattered, and so many people were never seen again by their loved ones. So many researchers and historians have attempted to retell the story of the Titanic for the world to learn more about the incident. A notable attempt at keeping the story of the Titanic fresh in our minds is the gigantic Titanic Museum in Belfast. There's also another Titanic Museum in Branson, Missouri. In fact, a Chinese shipbuilding company has built a full-size replica of the Titanic as an international tourist attraction. The 1997 blockbuster romance Titanic was one of the most successful movies of all time, grossing over $1 billion at the box office. It featured the adventurous love story of Jack and Rose, which were largely fictional characters. But one important element has been missing in the story of the Titanic, which of course would change how we view that tragic event. It is the story of the Haitian engineer Joseph Philippe Laroche and his wife Juliette Laforgue aboard the ill-fated Titanic. Theirs was a real-life love story on the Titanic, and its ending was equally tragic. The tragic story of Joseph Laroche not only broadens the narrative of Titanic, but it also speaks to inequities in the black experience, which many Titanic historians have failed to cite. Joseph Laroche was born in Cap-Haïtien, Haiti on May 26, 1886. He came from a family of means. Laroche was the nephew of Haitian President Cincinnatus Leconte and a direct descendant of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the man who proclaimed Haitian independence in 1804. At the age of 15, Laroche decided that he wanted to study engineering. There was no school for such a thing in Haiti, so he left for France, where he settled in Beauvais to attend engineering school. During his time in France, he met Juliette Laforgue, the daughter of a French wine seller. They soon became friends and fell in love. Laroche had also graduated from school and got married to Juliette in March of 1908. Almost 1 year into their marriage, their first daughter, Simone, was born. At this time, Laroche was actively looking for work based on his education. Unfortunately, due to racial discrimination, he was unable to obtain a decent-paying job, despite his degrees and skills. He was often cheated out of the wages he deserved for his work and talent. Employment wasn't actually scarce for someone with his skills, but whenever he found a job, his employers would make excuses that he was too young and inexperienced to justify his poor pay. Titanic scholar Judith Keller claimed no matter how qualified he was, the blackness of his skin kept him from securing a position that paid him for his work. He also worked as an engineer on Paris's north-south subway train line. 17 months after the birth of Simone, Louise, their second daughter, was born. But Louise's birth came prematurely and was complicated. As a result, she suffered health problems for the first several years of her life. With his compounding expenses and unemployment, Laroche needed to find a way to provide for his growing family. So Laroche and his wife decided to move back home to Haiti to look for a better paying job to take care of his family. His uncle and president of Haiti at the time, Cincinnatus Leconte, promised to appoint him to a professorship as a mathematician and pay him $200 a month. This amount of money was a big deal back then in 1912. They planned to leave in 1913, but when Juliette discovered that she was pregnant with their third child, they decided it would be better to travel pregnant rather than make the long trip with 3 little children. Joseph and Juliette hoped that their son would be born on the same island as Joseph's father, back home. They boarded the RMS Titanic at 7 p.m. on April 10, 1912. But it's important to note that they were initially meant to board the La France. the French liner. LaRoche's mother had bought 4 first-class tickets on a ship called La France for her son's family when she learned that they were coming back to Haiti. However, the French liner didn't allow children to stay with their families at the time. Juliette and Joseph didn't want their kids, especially the sickly Louise, separated from them. So in frustration, they agreed to exchange their first-class tickets on the ship for second-class tickets on the brand-new British liner RMS Titanic. It's also important to note that scholars have noted that nowhere in the corporate press coverage of the ship and any views of survivors was any black family ever mentioned, not even in the passenger manifest. The only known mention of Simone and Louise was made by Kate Boss in her letter home. She said, "There are 2 of the finest little baby girls, about 3 to 4 years old, who look like dolls running about the ship." So even the LaRoche girls weren't considered blacks. On April 14th, 4 days into the maiden voyage of the Titanic, the unthinkable happened. The Titanic struck an iceberg at about 11:40 p.m., and the collision forced the ship's hull plates to collapse inward, with 5 of the Titanic's 16 watertight compartments bursting open. Unfortunately, the ship only had the capacity to maintain 4 flooded compartments. Panic spread throughout the ship within minutes. It is estimated that of the 2,224 passengers and crew that boarded the ship, only 705, mostly women and children, were rescued on lifeboats. Juliette and Simone managed to be on a lifeboat. If you're enjoying this documentary so far, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This is only the beginning of the movement. While the media keeps you distracted with celebrity news and drama, we're making documentaries on all of the real leaders and legends in our culture. Thank you for the support, and let's get back into it. LaRoche's last known actions are rushing to make sure his second daughter, Louise, was placed on the same lifeboat as her mother and sister. In the frenzy that ensued, as he neared his wife, he had a confrontation with one of the sailors. He was trying to convince them that Louise was his daughter, but the stark difference between his skin color and that of his little daughter seemed to be an issue. But as he continued to plead his case, someone seized Louise and placed her in the arms of Juliette. Juliette had little time to speak to her husband as the lifeboat carrying them descended very fast into the sea. But above all the noise, Juliette heard Joseph's loud words of encouragement. He promised his wife they would see each other soon. Over the course of the night, the wide ocean swallowed the giant liner, including everyone who couldn't make it onto a lifeboat. Joseph was never able to rejoin his family. He perished along with approximately 1,500 other people. His body was never recovered. His wife and 2 children were practically stranded in New York as they were penniless and knew no one in the city. They were all on their own. To make matters worse, Juliette did not speak English. It took about 3 weeks for her and the children to return to France on another ship called the Chicago. They arrived back in Paris to meet her grief-stricken father. Interestingly, Juliette blamed herself for her husband's death. She told her father that had she not insisted they change the tickets from the La France to the Titanic, all of their travails would have been avoided. But that wasn't the end of the woes for the LaRoche family. Just 4 months after the sinking of the Titanic, LaRoche's uncle and president of Haiti, Cincinnatus Leconte, died in a bomb blast that rocked the presidential palace. It was all too much for Juliette to bear. She hated to speak of the experience and even instructed her children never to speak of it. She wanted to grieve her husband's death without disturbances. Joseph LaRoche was only 25 years old when he died. At the time, Juliette was intensely fearful of journalists. In fact, she literally buried her past in 1940 when Nazi Germany invaded France. She was afraid that Nazis were seeking out anyone who seemed different. She didn't want anyone questioning the skin complexion of her daughters, so she buried a suitcase in her backyard that contained every picture that would have linked her children to a black father. Once again, anti-blackness placed the LaRoche family at risk. The suitcase remained buried for 6 years, until she was sure that the Nazis would not return. The effect of that incident wouldn't let her let the girls out of her sight. They lived in the same house and never married, even until Juliette's death. Juliette later gave birth to a son in December 1912, who she named Joseph Jr. after her husband. Louise LaRoche was one of the last remaining survivors of the Titanic until her death in 1998. At the time of her death, only 6 Titanic survivors remained. The presence of Joseph LaRoche on the RMS Titanic was largely unknown and challenged the long-held assumption of an all-white Titanic. But most importantly, his presence on that ship and fate thereafter make him a critical factor in understanding the impact of segregation and white supremacy on the livelihood and mobility of colored people during that time. LaRoche's story helps us to see what could be described as a display of white supremacy during that time. According to Kelly Carter Jackson, the NAFL Assistant Professor of Humanities in the Department of Africana Studies at Wesley College, the hype of the RMS Titanic, including its celebration today, seems to be less about technology and modernity and more about the potent combination of whiteness and wealth. Professor Jackson, in her paper, Losing LaRoche, the story of the Titanic's only black passenger, argued that it wasn't even the sinking of the Titanic that killed LaRoche in the first place, but anti-blackness. If he hadn't been so unfairly treated back in France, where he studied and initially settled, he wouldn't have needed to travel back home to Haiti to start afresh. So LaRoche's story highlights how the institutional and discriminatory practices against black people propelled them to constantly search for being and belonging. In other words, the migrations of many black people to different parts of the world are substantially motivated by their search for a better life. So since there were no engineering schools in Haiti, LaRoche traveled to France to get a quality education. He even traveled with his instructor, Munster Curzon, the Lord Bishop of Haiti, and lived in his home while attending school in Beauvais. But despite his proficiency in French, Creole, and English languages, quality education, and means, finding a decent job in France was difficult due to the stifling racial discrimination in France. This story had remained excluded from the famous account of the Titanic that we've come to know, and it wasn't until 1995 when a French member of the Titanic Historical Society interviewed Louise LaRoche that the remarkable story of the only black family on the Titanic was first shared with the general public. If you enjoyed this documentary, then I'm sure you'll love the one on the screen right now. It covers some hidden black history that they're terrified to teach in school. Click on it now to watch, and we'll see you over there.